The scariest predators aren't the ones hiding in the bushes. They're the ones who hunt in the open. The ones who memorize your routine, track your car, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. Today we have stories of a couple stalked across an entire city, a betrayal by a trusted family member, and the incredible true account of the teenage girl who outsmarted a serial killer. Today we have 4 true stories of stalkers and predators. Hello again, Raven. Definitely been loving the constant content uploads and really enjoying all of the new stories and members of the channel who are finally sharing their own crazy stories too. Especially the ones who have been longtime listeners and first-time shares around the campfire community you've built. Thank you, Fox. I'll always be thankful for that, as many of us have told you. This story actually took place not long ago, and Wifey is also in this one as well. And as always, this is a true story. We all have days where we get our list of household needs together, and rather than making a few trips to the store throughout the week, we'll pick one specific day, usually a weekend, and go to several stores in one big outing, so that groceries and household materials are all restocked at once. We build a list throughout the week of things we need, and then take said list to the store to purchase these items. Wifey and I have been doing this for a while. And for us, it sometimes doubles as an outing for us. I know what some of you might say. Grocery shopping at multiple stores isn't that much of a date, right? Well, in the traditional sense, you're not wrong. However, for Wifey and I, these moments to step away from all of the other things we do on set for TV shows, movies, teaching classes, and so on, the moments that we share as a normal married couple are enjoyable and precious to us. We usually use this time to talk to each other, share our tastes in certain foods, discuss household needs and things we'd like to have for the future, and pretty much get to know more about each other since shopping in stores can unlock all kinds of memories, goals, and other things we choose to share with each other. We've been together for 5 years, married for 2 of them, and every couple develops some kind of unique bonding that others might think is odd or unusual. But nonetheless, it's important. I know this seems like a detour, but I promise that all of this is relevant to the story. We picked a Saturday about a week before this story was shared, and headed to our first of 3 stops around mid-morning. Wifey and I love to go to Goodwill and look around for all kinds of cool knickknacks. She'll find yarn for her crocheting, and I'll usually find a decent pair of shoes, a cool shirt, and some pants. And, recently, I've been collecting some books. Raven, if you don't know already, you'd be surprised how many books wind up at thrift stores, especially books on computer forensics, CompTIA N+ certification, C++, and even a ton of JavaScript, Python, and more, which recently I've added to my library. Very nice and very true. When Wifey and I get into a store, we usually do the same thing. Walk in together, check a few items and see what deals or sales are going on, and then we go our separate ways to look at things in the areas of our interest. And then we meet back together by the aisles with all of the sporting goods. I keep an eye out for her across the store, and she does the same for me. Since we have had some issues in recent years with men trying to go and talk to Wifey, or otherwise try to follow her around the store when they see her by herself. I'm not the hovering type, of course, but I do know when someone's just looking, and when someone is waiting for me to move away and attempting to approach or follow her. Wifey also knows how to handle herself, and in most cases the worst that happens is one of the men who approach her will either see me headed back towards Wifey and correct their course immediately in the opposite direction, or they'll suffer the worst case of frostbite ever from the cold shouldering they get from Wifey. However, this time around, things were vastly different. I remember that I was eyeing a pair of shoes, trying to figure out what brand they were, and down the center aisle across the store, Wifey had found a dress with a pattern she liked, and was feeling the fabric with her hands, meaning she might make the purchase and use it for a project. I looked over at her across the store admirably as she smiled warmly, her eyes glowing, and she placed the dress in the shopping cart. I noticed someone moving through the men's section at a steady pace, and I looked over to see this Caucasian male in a brown jacket, with low, almost bald hair and a perpetual scowl, making his way in her direction. He was moving too fast to be shopping, but not so fast that it was obvious. So I did what I normally do when I see this kind of effort heading in wifey's direction, and I tossed the shoes back into the aisle and began walking quickly towards wifey myself. She glanced back at me and then over her shoulder, and began pushing the basket further down the back wall aisle where the dresses were, giving me a chance to reach her before the random man did. I remember how he stopped in his tracks as I greeted her, and she began to tell me enthusiastically about the dress she had found, and pretended to ask me if it was okay to buy it. She did this until the man finally stopped staring, turned around, and walked off. Without further words, wifey nodded at me, and we silently confirmed that we knew what was happening. After keeping a modest eye on the guy from a distance, we went toward the back book aisle, and wifey said that she wanted to go back and check on the glass aisle for one of those glass baking pans, which was only a couple of aisles away from where the book aisle was. Not even 2 minutes after she got there, I once again saw the same man working his way across the store toward her, and I dropped the books I had and walked back over to her. This time he made it to the front of the glass aisle as I arrived, and he stood there staring at me as I walked up to wifey and engaged her in yet another faux conversation about something she wasn't going to buy. I got a good look at his face. In addition to having cold blue eyes, he was wearing what looked like faded black cargo pants and what I recognized as steel-toed work boots. The analyst in me took note that his approach and body language didn't say "pretty lady I want to talk to," and his cold stare and abrupt change of direction whenever I approached her gave me the notion he was intending something possibly harmful or violent. After he walked off this time, wifey and I decided to go ahead and leave the store since it didn't seem like this guy was simply trying to hit on her, and he obviously wasn't taking a hint. We walked up to the front counter and paid for our items, forgoing the things that we hadn't yet looked through, and then we let the front cashier know about what had happened. We left the store, got in our car, and drove 5 miles away to shop at the nearby Kroger. Wifey was sharing a recipe idea with me as we strolled through the produce section gathering fruits and some vegetables that we needed, and she was telling me about a spaghetti squash recipe that I agreed sounded delicious. However, I'm not a fan of squash, so I told her she's on her own if she makes that for dinner. And then I told her about my idea for a smoked cheddar mac and cheese dish, which she reminded me that she doesn't like melted cheese sauce. We left the produce section and then split up. She headed to the bakery, and I went to the deli to see about the chicken sausage and fresh salmon fillets for a future meal. No more than 30 seconds of her being gone, wifey comes to find me in the deli. "You won't believe this," she said to me. But as she was speaking, I noticed in the distance just past her shoulder, that same man was floating around a rack with cookies on it and glancing in our direction. When we locked eyes, he stared for a few minutes and then walked away, vanishing into the moderate crowd of shoppers in the store. "What are the odds of him ending up at the same store as us?" I asked aloud, more rhetorically than anything, and wifey shook her head and basically gave me a look that said, "We need to shop. We can't let that stop us." While at Kroger, we did see him end up on the ends of the longer aisles, but he didn't try to approach us. And when we headed to checkout, he was gone already, which honestly gave me the feeling that he wasn't really at the store to shop. I tried to avoid jumping to conclusions, but I couldn't overlook the odd coincidence. This time when we left, I made sure to look around the parking lot, especially where we parked, and I looked around our car to make sure no tracking device or anything of the sorts had been attached to our car. For any of you who think this is paranoia, there are plenty of stories out there on social media about people sticking these things to other vehicles and then following people home. And even Raven read a story a while ago about a young lady who was traveling alone by car, and someone stuck something to the bottom of her car while she was sleeping. Fun fact, this is Raven outside of the story here, both Android and iOS have an option for you to scan for errant tracking devices, like the Apple, I don't know what they're called, I don't have an Apple phone, but the little GPS devices, both Android and Apple have a setting that you can actually scan for those. So just, it's not really paranoia if it's something that the big tech companies have at least implemented into their OSs. I wasn't about to take any chances, and I did share that story with Wifey too, because we knew that people can be crazy. We were originally supposed to head to Walmart next, but Wifey mentioned to me that she had forgotten an additional stop that we needed to make, and we ended up going to a local Harbor Freight to grab materials that she needed for a project. Keep in mind, this was not an originally planned stop for us. Well, guess what? About 10 minutes after we arrived, we walked toward the front counter down the center aisle, and guess who was standing by one of the first aisles near the front of the store? The man with the same brown jacket and faded black cargo pants. And this time he had a phone in his hand. This was the point in which we really became concerned. 1 store is normal. 2, a coincidence. But 3 stores? Not to mention, this wasn't a stop we originally planned to make that day. In usual fashion, the man disappeared as we neared the cash register, and while we were there, we did tell the cashier that we had seen the same guy now at 3 different stores. And Wifey told her that she was concerned he was following us. Sadly enough, the cashier called her manager to the front, and ultimately her manager asked if he had spoken to us or tried to make contact with us in any way. To which I told them he had tried to approach Wifey at our first stop twice, and only stopped when I walked back over to her. She said at Kroger she saw the man walking in her direction, and immediately came to find me in the deli when it happened. The manager ultimately told us that they couldn't do anything about it, since he hadn't tried to approach us or interact with us while at the store, and they said they would keep an eye on him through the security cameras, even though we were about to leave. When we got back to the car, I checked again for any tracking devices or weird objects attached to the bottom of the car. Wheel wells and undercarriage. But I didn't find anything. I did notice that this time in the store, Wifey and I hadn't separated away from each other at all, and the man didn't approach her. I couldn't figure out what he wanted with Wifey, or why he only seemed interested in approaching her while I wasn't around, and we were starting to feel unsettled about the fact that this was now appearing to be a blatant case of being followed. We only had 1 more stop to make, and even though this was happening, we needed to finish our shopping. Our final stop was Walmart. Massive store, tons of potential witnesses, and our list was moderately long since we had household and a few groceries to get. So we decided to be as in and out quick as we could be. We didn't see the man for the first 5 minutes. Then 15 minutes went by, and finally around 20 to 30, and we began feeling like the man wouldn't show up. We were hoping that he realized he was pushing his luck after seeing us at our first store stop, and then proceeding to appear at the next 2. Our list was halfway done, and Wifey and I had eased back into our relaxed conversations and banter. Even added in some slight flirting as we regained our comfort with the shopping trip as it should have been from the start. Wifey said that we needed some refills for the Swiffer, and asked if I could grab them while she grabbed the dish liquid from an aisle over. Without thinking twice about it, I agreed and we went to do just that. On my way back, Wifey was already coming down the aisle to meet me. I smiled at her, but the smile quickly vanished as I saw the other end of the aisle darken with that same man in the brown jacket and black cargo pants. He seemed as if he was rushing to get to the aisle, and once he saw me, he stopped and immediately began walking away. Wifey didn't have to look herself or ask me to know why my face suddenly hardened into a scowl. "You're freaking kidding me," she hissed. And I nodded to confirm that yes, the same man was indeed here with us at Walmart. This time we made a beeline for the customer service area, and asked to speak with security. It took them a few minutes, but a uniformed police officer and one of the managers came into the customer service area as Wifey explained to them what happened. While we were explaining the situation, I saw the man walking briskly down the aisles right outside of the checkout lanes, and I pointed the man out to both the police officer and the manager. The police officer immediately headed out toward the aisle and radioed something as he walked in the direction of the man we described was heading. Meanwhile, we were escorted to a security room where footage was reviewed, and it showed the man rushing down the aisle toward where Wifey was, seeing us, and then heading away. Here's the other chilling thing. As we walked toward the front to report this issue, in some of the camera frames, you could see the man walking somewhat casual, paralleling our paths on different aisles until we made it to the front customer service area. At that point, he seemed to walk away and head toward the bathrooms for a bit, but it was obvious that he wasn't there shopping. The police did get our statements about the other stores, and an additional officer did arrive to come speak with us as well about the other stores, and they said that they could have the footage reviewed at all the other places we had shopped that day. The good news is that we were told the man in the brown jacket was arrested for disorderly conduct, because apparently when I pointed him out to the first officer, that officer radioed to his partner who was still standing by the front doors about our claim. When the officer attempted to approach him in the parking lot, he refused to comply, kept trying to leave, and ended up having to be detained forcibly. As of right now, we haven't heard anything else about the open case, but the police report has been filed, and we of course live to tell the story. Wifey and I are okay, and even though things turned out in our favor, this was still one of the creepiest situations we've been in recently. Part of me still wonders what the man wanted with Wifey, and I shudder to think what would have happened if she was shopping by herself. Don't get me wrong, she's a motorcycle riding, knife collecting, handcrafting, and artistic person. She's normally gentle and caring and isn't the damsel in distress type at all. But she's also my wife. No one wants the person they love to ever be in danger. And seeing things like this also furthers my drive to continue teaching her and training her in the arts I know as well. So that's our story about the Storehopper stalker. And I hope he goes to jail for this, and doesn't do it to anyone else. Hi, Raven. I live on Vancouver Island. Back in April of 2019, I went to Campbell River, BC to get out with my sister for the evening. I had a great time. Well, at the beginning, anyway. I reside a town over in Courtenay. I almost never go out. To be honest, that was the last time I went to a bar. I'm only telling this story as this was something that happened to me and had to go to court for. The night went on for a while, as we were partying at a club named JJ's, where we had a good time. My sister and her hubby were separated, yet we went back to the place he resided for a few drinks after. I've known him for a good 20 years almost, so I trusted him. We had a few drinks and listened to music. They had older kids in the house that even had friends staying over. After a while, my sister decided to walk to my brother's place. I was feeling pretty woozy and decided to stay. I trusted, as I've known him for years, and my nieces and nephews were in the house. I fell asleep on the couch, and I woke up to my brother-in-law. Again, keep in mind this was my sister's husband when they were broken up. I was pretty drunk, but I knew this was wrong. He had actually pulled my pants down, and I won't get too much into it. I immediately screamed and tried to find my phone, which, oddly enough, I had no idea that my sister had taken it to my brother's for safekeeping. I realized I couldn't find it and then ran downstairs to my nephew and told him to message his mom for me. Moving forward a bit, well, he took advantage of me. The cops were there later on, and I gave a clear statement that very day. There was no consent, ever. So, Easy forward, almost 6 years later, finally a court date happened. I thought, finally. I had this burden that I had carried for years and no justice. I went to court a few times and gave my statements, and even though they had DNA evidence at the very end, they found him not guilty. I know that I didn't ask or want him to do this, and he knows this, yet he was found not guilty. If anything can come out of this, it's to just be aware of even the ones you trust the most. I carry this on my chest every single day, and I often wonder if it ever affects him. Hi Raven. I'm a big fan of your channel. I usually fall asleep to your videos at night. I have no idea what made me want to try to submit my story to you. I have a learning disability, and because of that, I know that my writing is often hard to understand. But here's my story. This happened when I was in middle school. I can't remember how old I was, but my mom had become friends with a woman named Lena, and you know how it goes when your mom becomes friends with someone. You have to become friends with the kids of that person. Lena had 2 stepdaughters named Angel and Sierra that I did not get along with, that I had to spend time with. My dad had to be friends with Chris, Lena's husband. He's a POS. That's a story for another day. It was a Friday, and we found ourselves spending the day with all of them. It was Sierra, Angel, myself, and our other friend Jordan, and our parents, of course. Us kids decided to head to the park that wasn't far from where the house was. It was sunny, and to be honest, the last thing we wanted to do was stay in the house listening to our parents talk while we watched TV. So, to the park we went. It wasn't a big park, just one of those parks that housing sometimes had in the complexes. Now, I need to explain the ages between the 4 of us so no one gets confused on why we didn't stay together as a group. Angel and Jordan were a few years older than me and very much into talking about boys, makeup, shoes, etc. And here's something you need to know about me. While I am physically my age, I am not my age mentally. I'm much younger mentally. Unfortunately, that means the idea of hanging out with Angel and Jordan, hearing them talk about boys' shoes and such, I'd honestly rather just shoot myself in the foot. So, that's why I found myself spending time at the park with Sierra, who was a few years younger than I was. We were hanging out on the swings, and for the life of me, I can't remember where Jordan and Angel were in the park at this point. We properly spent 4 hours at the park before it started to get dark. And that's when the events that I'm about to tell you happened. "Let's go back to my house," said Sierra, jumping off her swing. "I'm not ready to go back. It's still not dark, and I'm sure our parents won't mind if we stayed out here a little longer," I said, still swinging my legs back and forth, trying to go faster on the swing. "Kaylee, I'm serious. Let's go back to the house. I'm ready to go." And I said, "Not yet," rolling my eyes. And Sierra was the youngest in her family, and was so used to getting her way, but I wasn't the type of person that gave in to her whining, and she knew it. It was probably 20 minutes later that Sierra spoke again. "Do you want to know why I want to leave the park so badly?" Sierra asked. I just looked at her before nodding. "There's a man in our neighborhood that comes out when it gets dark, and he likes to watch the kids around the park and will follow them home," said Sierra. I felt my eyes widen at her words. I could not believe that her parents would have let us go to the park if there was a man following kids home. "What do you mean?" I asked with my voice shaking slightly. "We need to go now," said Sierra, grabbing my hand and pulling me off the swing. The 2 of us walked out of the park more than ready to go back to the house. "There he is," said Sierra, causing me to look back behind me. There was a man that was walking behind us, and he was wearing all black and kept just looking down at the ground. "Go faster," I said. walking faster and grabbing Sierra's hand. I felt like my heart was about to burst out of my chest. I've been overweight my whole life, and because of that reason, I was not the fastest of my friends. I always joked that it'll be me that dies first if something ever happens, because I can't run fast to save my life. But that night, with the man following me and Sierra, I went at a pace that I didn't know I could go. We eventually saw a couple walking their dog on the other side of the street, so we felt like we could slow down just a little bit so I could catch my breath. "Is he still following us?" I asked Sierra, breathing heavily, as badly as I wanted to stop walking to catch my breath. We knew that we had to keep walking with the couple right across from us. If there were people close by, we knew this man wouldn't do anything to us. Well, at least that's what I was hoping. "Yeah, he's walking faster now." "Crap," I muttered. "Oh no, they're leaving," said Sierra, as the couple who had been walking their dog had entered their house. Looking behind me, the man was still following us. All I could think of was how we were going to die. At this age, all I had watched lately was true crime, so I was wholeheartedly thinking that this was going to be what happened right now. "Go faster, Kaylee," said Sierra, grabbing my hand and pulling me further. We had a little bit to run to get to Sierra's house, and with the man still following us, I didn't think we would make it, especially with me not being really fast. "Just run ahead and get our parents," I said. "It's not going to happen," said Sierra, pulling me harder. The rest of the run was done in silence. All you could hear was my wheezing. Thank God, after a while, we saw Sierra's house. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was like the two of us were hit with sudden speed that I didn't know we had when we saw the house. We both ran to the house, practically bursting through the door. Our parents looked at us in shock. "What happened to you two?" asked Lena. Before I could say anything, Sierra cut in, saying, "Oh, I made up a story about a man following the kids around here so we could go home. His dumbass fell for it," Sierra said as she walked away. I felt like I had been punched in the face. What do you mean she made it up just to get us back to the house? But it all made sense. Sierra had wanted to go home, and I told her that I didn't want to go home, that I wanted to stay in the park. And then all of a sudden, she's telling me about this man coming after kids when it got darker. I looked at my parents, still breathing heavily. Looking at my mom and dad, I could tell that my dad was beyond pissed. And my mother looked like she was horrified in the fact that Sierra lied about something like this. It was mind-blowing. Before I could say anything, Jordan and Angel bursted into the house, and that's when I had remembered that we never told them that we were leaving. If this had been real, we had left our friends behind. A thought that still upsets me to this day. We didn't stay there much longer after that. I had to leave or I was going to hurt Sierra. And that was the start of the beginning of the end of our friendship. I couldn't trust her or anything she said after something like that. I was still forced to spend time with Angel and Sierra from time to time, but not as often. Angel left the house a few years later, and we had moved states, thank God, and Sierra, the day she turned 18, left in the middle of the night, never to be seen by them again. I know this story isn't really that scary, but to a middle school kid, this was the scariest night of my life. I often think about this story, and it still upsets me to this day. I still want to punch her in the face. That's not something you lie about. If she lied about this, I can't imagine the other lies that she had told people over the years. But I hope anyone that is friends with her takes everything with a grain of salt. So, that's my story. I hope you all enjoyed it, and Raven, thank you for telling my story. I love your videos, and I always look forward to the next one. This story is probably going to have people saying, but that's not a stalker story. And to a degree, they would be right. but framing it as one is also right. And now, Tom will show his work. Lisa was indeed the victim of a stalker, just not the kind you generally think of when you hear that term. Not all stalkers are driven by obsession. It's not an individual-based thing. Some stalkers are very much like apex predators. They're territorial, and all it takes is the right person walking through the park under the watchful but unseen eyes of a predator for the game to be afoot. And Lisa McVey had caught the eye of the scariest kind of monster, an active, hunting serial killer. So in this case, he wasn't stalking her, but he was very much a stalker. Lisa was just the target of opportunity. So who is Lisa McVey? Long before she caught the eye of an active predator, Lisa McVey was already a survivor. Her childhood had been, well, let's just say that she had already endured things that most people would classify as unendurable, and then move on from that. But in the mid-1980s, Lisa was just a 17-year-old girl trying to do what most people are: keep her life together. She was working hard trying to build some kind of future. Lisa was not a runaway. She wasn't the portrait of stability, but she wasn't chasing trouble. Lisa was working late-night shifts at an all-night donut shop. 2 a.m., need a donut? No problem. Glamorous? Hardly. But it was work. She didn't own a car, but for an enterprising young lady such as Lisa, that was a speed bump, not a full stop. So she just rode her bike to and from work. Same route, same routine, predictable and safe. It was the kind of thing that just inherently felt safe because it was a routine. Besides, as I said, Lisa had come from a very tumultuous childhood. So, something like a late-night bike ride in Tampa was not something to put her off from doing what she needed to do. November 3rd, 1984 was just another cold night. Another late shift and another ride home for Lisa. The streets of Tampa were quiet, as they always were at 2 a.m. Between the quiet and the routine, it was impossible not to feel safe, and even a little bit warm in the comfort of it despite the season. Unfortunately, what Lisa couldn't know is that there was someone else out on the streets with her that night. Predatory eyes that have caught sight of someone crossing his hunting ground. Maybe it's the first time he's seen her. Maybe he's caught sight of her a few times and has just chosen tonight to act on his urges. Regardless, he does choose this night. He does choose Lisa, and he does strike. Lisa was riding across a church parking lot when the car swooped in. Everything happened so fast. The attacker pulled her from her bike and forced her into his car. There was the flash of a gun, a strongly worded threat, and then Lisa's routine was shattered as he drove her into the night. Now, I'm going to take just a moment here to acknowledge a few things. What Lisa endures during this abduction is beyond words, and not something I'm going to focus on. The violence is not getting the spotlight. This is a story about survival and transformation, and that is what we are going to focus on. This isn't about what Lisa endured, it's about how she survived. Now, back to the story. The moment that car door slammed and the engine roared into the night, almost anyone else's world would have shattered as panic took hold. Many people would have frozen up or shut down, and understandably so. But Lisa's mind went into overdrive. Her eyes were covered with the blindfold, but she could still feel the rough vinyl of the seat. She could smell stale cigarettes and a cheap air freshener. She couldn't see the road, but she could feel every turn, every curve. Lisa began counting those turns, counting the number of seconds they were driving straight. She even thought to count the number of times the car stopped at intersections, red lights, and stop signs. Every movement of the car became a bit of information that her brain filed away. Maybe at the time she didn't even realize why her brain was latching on to certain bits of information, but each bit of it did help her in the moment. Each bit would help someone find her later, if there was indeed a later. Even the most mundane of details, such as how many times he tapped on the wheel, the way the car engine strained on the incline of a hill, all of it filed away in her brain. The more she planned for there to be a later, the more likely there was indeed going to be a later. Lisa was fully aware of when the car finally stopped, the silence that replaced the groan of the engine, and then a door opened on her right, and there was pressure. Hands grabbing her. Pulled or pushed, it doesn't matter. For Lisa, it was just challenge number 1. Get out of the car without losing her center. Her feet hit the ground. She became aware of everything. Her senses still in overdrive, and fear was not dulling her. It was sharpening her awareness. The temperature. Which way was the wind blowing? Was it gravel or pavement under her shoes? Detail after detail her mind clamped onto, and refused to let go of. She's still in the dark, but she is far from as helpless as that blindfold makes her seem. Challenge 1 complete, on to challenge number 2, the walk. Rough hands guide her, force her forwards. He thinks he's controlling her pace, but in her mind, Lisa was counting steps, making notes about changes to the terrain underfoot. 2 steps, 3 steps, and then an elevation change, a curb, maybe. A threshold? Then the jingling of keys and the sound of a door opening. The air pressure changes, a transition from outdoors to indoors. The air smells different, a bit stale and human, but not lived in. Walk complete. Now for challenge number 3. Draw a blind map. Still blindfolded, guided by hands she could feel but not see, Lisa allows her other senses to draw the map for her. The floor changed again. It's carpet now. The air is warmer too. Musty. Soft floor and warm air, and some kind of faint noise in the distance. A TV, perhaps? Maybe the drone of a fan? She still couldn't see, but every little noise helped create a mental image of her surroundings. Every sound became a landmark. This was her new environment, and if there truly was going to be a later, then she needed to understand it better than the person dragging her through it. Another thump. Furniture. A couch, perhaps. No. Maybe the corner of a table. Right now, it was all in little pieces, but it was darkness that was becoming familiar to her. Challenge number 4, learning to read while blindfolded. Lisa was learning very quickly just how true it was that losing your sight heightened your other senses. Most people read a room using their eyes, and Lisa was learning how to read the room using her everything else. She could still read, of course. The sensory input was just different. Right now, she was very aware that there was another person nearby. She could tell by the breathing. It wasn't exactly steady breathing, nor was it frantic. Breathing can tell you a lot. Boredom, anxiety, anger. Quietly, Lisa matched her own breathing, her own heartbeat to the other's breathing. That way she would know the second it changed. Then came the movement. The way the floor shifted with his weight. There was a lot to be heard in the silence. Silence could speak volumes. It meant he was watching, thinking, or waiting. She just had to figure out what he was watching and waiting for. Had to learn what he was thinking. Silence meant that she had to listen even harder. The truly hard part, though, was learning just that. Learning to read him. She needed to read him while not letting him read her back. Her voice had to stay measured, neutral. If he thought she was scared, it was over for her. If he thought she was too defiant, too rebellious, it would only get worse. Much worse. Challenge number 5, which was controlling the narrative. So far, her adaptation has been impeccable. She's counting steps, memorizing turns, Lisa has learned to read the entire room while completely blindfolded. But only so much of survival hinges on gathering intelligence. If she were going to truly survive, then survival meant that she had to evade, resist, and escape. In order to do that, she was going to have to manage a certain level of control in the situation. Lisa needed to take control of the story that this attacker thought he was the one writing. She had gotten familiar with the room that she was in. Now she needed to get familiar with what was inside of his head. Lisa was already a survivor after all, and she knew enough about unstable people, all too much, honestly, to know that a human mind could be led like a skittish horse, if you knew how to work the reins. And his breathing, the hesitation in his movements, his silence, was telling her that this man was volatile. If she were going to get out of this, then she needed to change how he perceived her. She couldn't come off as a threat, but she couldn't come off as meek either. She couldn't be seen as an enemy or she was dead. She couldn't be seen as weak or she was dead. She needed to control the narrative enough, just enough that she was seen as a person to him, a person with a story, with a life that mattered. And so, Lisa became a gardener and began planting these seeds. A hint of attachment here, a note of vulnerability there. Suggestions here and there that she mattered outside of this room, that someone out there needed her. Lisa didn't babble. She didn't plead, and she certainly didn't overshare. She told things that were impersonal enough to not matter to her, but just personal enough to matter to him. Challenge number 6, creating separation. It was excruciating walking that razor's edge. One misstep either direction and it was all over. Lisa had planted those seeds, and now it was time to start fabricating and driving a wedge. Discreetly, of course. The seeds that she was a person with a life that mattered were just starting to take root. And now she had to skillfully push that wedge between her captor and whatever dark intentions he had in store for her. She had already tasted just enough of that cruelty to know that if she didn't pull this master stroke of wedge crafting, this road did not end in a good place for her. For now, she had to start creating that all-important separation between multiple things at once. She had to distance herself from the image of being prey. She had to distance herself from whatever dark end this assailant had in mind. She had to distance this predator from his dark urges. It was like juggling blowtorches in a storeroom full of gunpowder, but Lisa was crushing it. It wasn't time to make the grab for freedom yet, but every bit of mental work she'd been putting in from the second she'd been grabbed off her bike was starting to pay off. Bit by bit, she was able to say the right things, in the right tone. The wedges that she had made were holding splendidly, and gradually through that blindfold, she could see the faintest of lights beginning to shine. Challenge number 7, picking her spot. The hours that Lisa had put into creating one single outcome, one where she lived, must have felt like a lifetime. Seconds probably felt like hours, and hours probably felt like days. But it was working. The mapping, the counting, the reading was all starting to pay off. And now the seed-planting, wedge-driving Lisa could feel a shift in his presence. His breathing was becoming more unsure. His grip was a little less forceful. Tiny cracks in his facade were showing. Sure, to most people it may not have felt like much, but to Lisa, it may as well have been the first crack in a failing dam. It was monumental. This was it. This was her spot. The true trick in survival isn't that perfect opening. The true trick is finding the imperfect opening and then making it work. And at this point, I think we all know that Lisa is more than capable of making a less than ideal situation work for her. Long ago, she had gotten very good at spotting those microfractures in human behavior, and her captor was starting to waver. Lisa wasn't safe, nowhere close, but it was starting to feel like she could be safe again. There was going to be a later. Her seeds had started to sprout and bear greens. Something so incredibly fragile, but so vital to her right now. Doubt. Not in her, but in him. She leaned in just a bit more. She didn't even have to try that hard to keep her voice in that perfect range. Not prey and not threat. That impossible juggling and tightrope act she'd been working was suddenly a lot less impossible. He wasn't seeing her as prey anymore. He was starting to see her as a person that he had to figure out what to do with. A person that hadn't been part of this neat little script he'd written in his own head. Lisa could feel it starting to radiate off of him during those silences. The silence wasn't threatening anymore. It wasn't a terrifying unknown now. The silence was more telling than anything else, because now it was full of confusion. It was the first sign that she had loud and clear that she was going in the right direction. The angles that she had been working, the seeds she had planted, the wedges she'd been driving, hadn't been in vain at all. If anything, they may have worked to a point that she didn't need to worry about escape, because if she kept working things like she had, hell, he may have been about to let her go. And being released is a lot more of a sure bet than trying to escape. Challenge 8. Walking out alive. It had been an incredibly arduous night for Lisa. She had been in survival overdrive for so long that it was hard to remember what normal felt like. And she was learning that the hardest part of survival isn't the terror, it isn't the pain, it isn't even the moment of peak danger, it's management. Because the moment you see that glimmer of hope, when you feel that tide begin to change, you can't celebrate it. Can't even acknowledge it. For Lisa, keeping that composure rewarded her with something she had never dared hope for. The blindfold loosened just a bit. It wasn't off and she was still mostly in the dark, but that little gesture told her everything. She didn't let herself jump at it. A mumbled word of gratitude, and she continued to play the role that she had perfected in the last several hours. She couldn't let herself lose that composure now. She was so close, but she couldn't betray a thing to her captor. Silently, however, she allowed herself to enjoy the feeling of solid, if not quite safe, ground beneath her feet. She had the narrative. She had the control. Now she just had to get herself home. Then, in that silence that was a lot less terrifying than before, there was the rustle of movement. Those rough hands reached for her again, but with less malice. And finally, the ropes binding her were untied. She was free. Keeping control of herself, Lisa didn't move. She didn't even let her breathing quicken. Somehow, despite everything Lisa had achieved, a kind of self-control that Buddhist monks would envy. And then the blindfold loosened more. It wasn't off fully, but she could just see enough now to know that she was being guided to the door. When she first stepped outside, she fought the urge to run. So far, walking was what kept her alive, and the last thing she needed to do was remind the predator of the original script for this night by acting like the prey she had convinced him she was not. So, Lisa started walking, and kept walking, until she was certain that he wasn't hovering behind her. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. She finally let herself acknowledge that she was alive and that she was free. Lisa McVey had survived her abduction by a serial killer, although she wouldn't know just what and who she had survived until the days ahead of her. Days that she had because she had just completely outfoxed a predator. And then there's everything that came after. Of course, Lisa did not leave that night unchanged. No one could go through what she had and not be changed, but she had made a decision that her story wasn't going to end in that apartment, in the dark, on someone else's terms. Lisa went home. She carried on, and she told the truth about what happened to her. Every bit of information that she had stored away, every right turn, every stoplight. All of it helped the police find the person who had abducted Lisa. It turns out, the man who had taken her was a serial killer, and he had been active in the Tampa area long before Lisa's orbit had crossed his. For integrity's sake and nothing else, that man is Bobby Joe Long. And now that I've said his name, we're going to turn back to the star of this story, the, at this point, absolute legend Lisa McVey. Because she went on to have quite the career in law enforcement. Lisa went on to become a deputy of the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office in Florida, the very same department that investigated her own case. That's the kind of full circle that any story lover can appreciate. And to Lisa McVey, girl, you are an absolute legend. So that, my friends, was a creepy encounter / stalker and stranger / stalkers and predators collection of stories. This collection of stories, in general, is one that I have always had a weird, apprehensive mentality against titling it. I never know how to call it. It was creepy encounters, then let's not meet stories, then stalkers and strangers, then stalker stories, then I don't know. Stalkers and predators, I guess. I don't know. It's all over the place. If you see anything like that, you know what the stories are going to be from here on out. So, this title, though, in my opinion, does provoke a much stronger emotion, and that's kind of what I was going for, because it's not always strangers and stalkers. It's stalkers and people with predatory intent. So, anyway, hopefully you enjoyed the stories. Enjoyed's the wrong word, but you know what I mean. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do hit that like button. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider subscribing. That'd be appreciated. You can also send your stories in to astheravendreams.com or email them directly to me at astheravendreams@gmail.com. You can also leave your comment down below the video. Let me know your thoughts. And yeah. Join Patreon or memberships to get early access to content like this. The join button down below or patreon.com/astheravendreams, where for as little as $1 a month you can support the channel further and get more content. Well, get early content is a better way to put that. You can go to the website, like I mentioned, astheravendreams.com. There you can find my podcast and all the longer formats and all the platforms, as well as stories I've written, my social media links, and a few other things. You know, that's how it goes. Anyways, friends, hope you're having a beautiful week so far. Hope I see you again here very soon. But until then, please remember that you are loved, you are valid, you are important. You're the best you that you can be, don't forget it, and the world is a better place with you in it. And until I see you again, my friends, much love, and sleep well.